In a quiet little town where life moved at its own unhurried pace, there lived a man named Marcus. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had an air of calmness that made people feel safe around him. Marcus wasn't flashy or loud. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that commanded respect. His family had lived in the town for generations, and over time, Marcus became someone everyone trusted. Whether it was settling disputes between neighbors or lending a helping hand to someone in need, Marcus always seemed to be there. Marcus owned a small bar on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, just a cozy place with wooden tables, dim lights, and a jukebox that played old-school blues and rock and roll. The bar attracted all kinds of people: construction workers stopping by after a long day, travelers passing through, and even locals looking for a place to unwind. What set Marcus's bar apart wasn't just the drinks or music, it was the sense of belonging it gave to those who walked through its doors. People came not just for the cold beer, but for the warmth of the community Marcus fostered. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and purple, Marcus stood behind the counter wiping glasses. The bar was lively, filled with laughter and conversation. Outside, the streets were unusually quiet, save for the occasional car driving past. But that peace was shattered when a commotion erupted near the entrance of the bar. Voices rose sharply, cutting through the hum of chatter inside. Curious, Marcus stepped out to see what was happening. A group of police officers had surrounded a man near the sidewalk. They were shouting questions, their flashlights illuminating the scene like spotlights. The man looked panicked, his hands raised defensively as he tried to explain himself. Marcus squinted in the fading light and immediately recognized the man. It was James, an ex-convict who had recently returned to town. James had served several years in prison for a crime he deeply regretted, and since his release, he had been working tirelessly to rebuild his life. He took odd jobs, kept to himself, and avoided trouble at all costs. Seeing him now, cornered and scared, broke Marcus's heart. The officers accused James of being involved in a disturbance reported earlier that evening. A shopkeeper nearby claimed someone matching James's description had acted suspiciously outside their store. Though James repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, the officers weren't convinced. One of them grabbed James roughly by the arm, demanding answers. James winced in pain, his voice trembling as he pleaded his innocence. The situation was escalating fast, and Marcus knew he couldn't just stand by and watch. Without hesitation, Marcus approached the group. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. The officers turned to look at him, clearly surprised by his sudden appearance. One of them, a younger officer with a stern expression, replied curtly, "This doesn't concern you, sir. Please step back." But Marcus didn't budge. Instead, he took another step forward, positioning himself between James and the officers. "If this is about James," Marcus said, gesturing toward the frightened man, "then it concerns me. He's part of my community." The tension in the air thickened. The officers exchanged glances, unsure how to handle the unexpected interference. Marcus continued, his tone unwavering. "I've known James for years. Whatever you think he did, give him a chance to explain. Don't treat him like a criminal without proof." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic and the rustling of leaves in the cool night breeze. Then, reluctantly, the officers loosened their grip on James. After a few more tense moments, they finally let him go, warning him to stay out of trouble before walking back to their patrol car. As the flashing lights of the police vehicle disappeared into the distance, Marcus turned to James. "Are you okay?" he asked, placing a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. James nodded weakly, still shaken from the ordeal. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Marcus shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. Let's get you inside." Back at the bar, Marcus poured James a glass of water and sat down beside him. The room was quieter now, the earlier excitement replaced by a somber mood. Word had spread quickly among the patrons about what had happened outside. Some nodded approvingly at Marcus, while others whispered among themselves, debating whether his actions were wise. But Marcus didn't care about the opinions of others. All that mattered was doing what was right. That night, as Marcus closed, up the bar, he couldn't shake the image of James's frightened face from his mind. He thought about the countless times he'd seen similar incidents unfold, not just in his town but across the country. Too often people like James were judged not by their actions but by their pasts. Marcus knew standing up to the police wouldn't solve everything, but maybe, just maybe, it could make a difference. One person at a time. Little did Marcus know, his decision to intervene would ripple far beyond that single night. By morning, news of what had happened had traveled throughout the town. People talked about it over breakfast, during coffee breaks, and even at school drop-offs. Some praised Marcus for his bravery, calling him a hero. Others criticized him, saying he should have stayed out of it. But regardless of the differing opinions, one thing was certain. Marcus's actions had sparked something bigger than anyone could have anticipated. By mid-morning, an unusual sight greeted Marcus as he unlocked the bar's door. Dozens of motorcycles lined the street outside. At first glance, it looked like a biker gathering or rally passing through town. But as Marcus stepped closer, he realized these riders weren't random visitors. They were there for him. Word of his courageous act had reached bikers from neighboring towns, many of whom had never met Marcus but felt compelled to show their support. Riders clad in leather jackets and bandanas parked their bikes one after another, their engines rumbling like thunder. Some brought banners bearing messages of solidarity, while others simply offered handshakes and hugs. Among them were members of local motorcycle clubs, veterans, and even ordinary citizens who rode bikes as a hobby. Despite their diverse backgrounds, they shared a common bond: admiration for Marcus's courage. As the crowd grew, so did the energy. Strangers introduced themselves, sharing stories of injustice they had witnessed or experienced firsthand. Conversations flowed freely, turning the area around the bar into a vibrant hub of connection and camaraderie. For Marcus, it was both overwhelming and inspiring. He hadn't expected recognition, let alone such an extraordinary display of unity. Yet here it was, a testament to the power of standing up for what was right. The gathering wasn't just about celebrating Marcus's bravery, however. It was also a statement, a message to the authorities and the wider community that people refused to tolerate unfair treatment. Speakers took turns addressing the crowd, urging everyone to stand together against prejudice and inequality. Their words resonated deeply, especially with those who had faced discrimination themselves. For James, the event marked a turning point. Encouraged by the outpouring of support, he resolved to use his second chance wisely. Inspired by Marcus's example, he began volunteering at a local youth center, hoping to guide young people away from the mistakes he had made. Meanwhile, Marcus continued running his bar, which had become more than just a drinking spot. It had transformed into a symbol of hope and resilience. Though the motorcycle rally eventually ended, its impact lingered. Every time someone drove past Marcus's bar, they remembered the day hundreds of bikers came together to defend justice. It was proof that even in the darkest times, acts of kindness and courage could ignite change. And for Marcus, it was a reminder that doing the right thing, no matter how daunting, always made a difference. The next morning, Marcus woke up earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the sleepy town. He stretched and yawned, still feeling the weight of the previous night's events. As he made his way to the bar, he couldn't help but replay the confrontation in his mind. Had he done the right thing? Would there be consequences for challenging the police? These questions lingered like shadows, but Marcus pushed them aside. He reminded himself that standing up for James wasn't about seeking approval. It was about doing what felt fair. When Marcus arrived at the bar, he froze in disbelief. The street outside was lined with motorcycles, dozens of them. At first, he thought it was some kind of local event or parade passing through town, but as more bikes rolled in, their engines rumbling like distant thunder, he realized this gathering was for him. Riders from nearby towns, many of whom he had never met, had come to show their support. Some wore leather jackets adorned with patches from motorcycle clubs, while others dressed casually, their helmets tucked under their arms. Despite their differences, they shared one thing in common: respect for Marcus's bravery. Marcus stepped outside, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure how to react. A burly man with tattoos covering his arms approached him first. "You're Marcus, right?" the man asked, extending a calloused hand. Marcus nodded and shook it firmly. "We heard what you did last night," the man continued, his voice gruff but sincere. "Not many people would stand up like that. You've got guts, man." One by one, the riders introduced themselves. They came from all walks of life. Some were veterans who had served overseas, others were blue-collar workers looking for a sense of brotherhood. Many of them had stories of their own encounters with injustice, whether it involved racial profiling, unfair treatment, or simply being judged based on appearances. For them, Marcus's actions weren't just heroic, they were personal. They saw themselves in James, and they admired Marcus for defending someone society often overlooked. As the hours passed, the crowd grew larger. By noon, hundreds of motorcycles filled the area around the bar. Spectators gathered curiously, snapping photos and whispering among themselves. Local news crews even showed up, eager to document the unexpected spectacle. Marcus stood near the entrance, overwhelmed but grateful. He hadn't expected any recognition, let alone this massive display of solidarity. It was humbling and empowering. Inside the bar, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. People mingled freely, sharing food and drinks brought by the riders. Someone cranked up the jukebox, filling the room with upbeat tunes. Laughter echoed off the walls, blending with the occasional roar of a motorcycle engine outside. Despite the chaos, there was an undeniable sense of unity. Strangers exchanged stories, finding common ground in their struggles and triumphs. For once, the barriers of race, class, and background seemed to fade away, replaced by a shared understanding of fairness and humanity. Among the attendees was James himself. He arrived quietly, slipping into the crowd almost unnoticed. When Marcus spotted him, he waved him over. "Hey, man," Marcus said warmly. "Glad you could make it." James hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't think anyone would care enough to do something like this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This isn't just for you," he replied. "It's for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly." Throughout the day, speakers took turns addressing the crowd. One writer, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair, spoke passionately about her experiences as a black woman navigating a world rife with prejudice. "People try to put us in boxes," she said, her voice steady but charged with emotion. "They see our skin color, our clothes, or our bikes, and they judge us before we even open our mouths. But today we're showing them that we won't stay silent anymore." Another speaker, a young man wearing a denim vest covered in patches, shared his story of overcoming addiction and rebuilding his life. "I've been where James is," he confessed. "I know what it feels like to have the world turn its back on you. That's why what Marcus did matters so much. He reminded us that we're not alone, that there are still good people willing to fight for justice." Each speech resonated deeply with the audience, drawing cheers and applause. Even those who weren't directly affected by discrimination found themselves moved by the raw honesty and vulnerability of the speakers. It was a powerful reminder that everyone had a role to play in creating a better, fairer world. As the day wore on, the gathering took on a life of its own. Children played tag between parked motorcycles, their laughter adding a touch of innocence to the otherwise serious occasion. Elderly residents sat on folding chairs, watching the scene unfold with pride in their eyes. Young couples danced spontaneously to the music, their movements carefree and joyful. For a moment, it felt like the entire town had come together, not just to celebrate Marcus's courage, but to reaffirm their commitment to supporting one another. Despite the festive vibe, the underlying message remained clear. This was more than just a party. It was a statement, a declaration that the community wouldn't tolerate unfair treatment or systemic injustice. Several riders handed out flyers promoting upcoming protests and rallies aimed at addressing issues like police brutality and racial inequality. Others encouraged attendees to get involved in local advocacy groups, emphasizing the importance of sustained action beyond a single day of solidarity. By late afternoon, the riders began preparing to leave. Before departing, they made a promise to Marcus and the rest of the community. If anyone else needed help, whether it was defending someone against discrimination or fighting for justice, they vowed to return. Their words carried a sense of determination, a collective resolve to keep pushing for change. As the last motorcycle disappeared down the road, Marcus stood outside, watching the empty street. The noise and excitement had faded, leaving behind a profound sense of gratitude. His bar, once just a humble watering hole, had become something greater, a symbol of hope and resistance. And though Marcus knew challenges lay ahead, he felt ready to face them, knowing he wasn't alone. For James, the day marked a turning point. Inspired by the overwhelming support he received, he decided to take control of his future. Over the next few weeks, he began volunteering at a local youth center, mentoring kids who reminded him of his younger self. He also started attending community meetings, eager to contribute to discussions about reform and equality. Slowly but surely, James transformed his past mistakes into fuel for positive change. Meanwhile, Marcus continued running his bar, which had become a hub for activism and connection. People stopped by not just for drinks, but for meaningful conversations about how to make the world a better place. The walls of the bar were soon decorated with posters promoting social causes, alongside thank you notes from visitors who had been inspired by Marcus's example. Though the motorcycle rally was over, its impact rippled far beyond the town. News outlets picked up the story, turning it into a national conversation about racial profiling, systemic injustice, and the power of community. People praised Marcus for his selflessness, while critics accused him of interfering with law enforcement. But none of that mattered to Marcus. What mattered was the difference he had made, not just in James's life, but in the lives of everyone who witnessed the event. In the end, the gathering proved that acts of courage, no matter how small, could spark monumental change. For Marcus, it was a lesson he would carry with him forever. When you stand up for what's right, you inspire others to do the same. And sometimes, all it takes is one brave decision to ignite a movement. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, painting the horizon with hues of orange and pink. The crowd outside Marcus's bar started to thin as the riders prepared to leave, but the energy of the day lingered like a warm embrace. Marcus stood by the entrance, shaking hands and exchanging hugs with the departing bikers. Each one thanked him for inspiring them to come together. Their words filled with sincerity. Some promised to stay in touch, while others simply nodded in respect before mounting their bikes. As the engines roared back to life, the sound was both powerful and bittersweet, a reminder that moments like this didn't happen often. Inside the bar, the atmosphere remained lively, though quieter now. A few stragglers lingered, sipping beers and recounting the events of the day. One man, an older gentleman named Harold who had lived in the town for decades, raised his glass in a toast. To Marcus, he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, for reminding us what it means to stand up for each other. The room erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but today was different. Today, he realized, wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who believed in standing against injustice. As the evening wore on, Marcus took a moment to reflect. He stepped outside, breathing in the cool night air. The street was empty now, save for a few scattered cigarette butts and discarded flyers left behind by the riders. Despite the mess, Marcus couldn't help but smile. This place, his bar, had become something far greater than he ever imagined. It wasn't just a spot for drinks anymore. It was a symbol of hope, a meeting ground for people from all walks of life who shared a common goal, making the world a little fairer. But as much as Marcus appreciated the support, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Standing up to authority always came with risks, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there might be repercussions. Would the police hold a grudge? Would they target him or James in the future? These thoughts weighed heavily on his mind. But Marcus pushed them aside. Worrying about what-ifs wouldn't change anything. What mattered was staying true to himself and continuing to do what was right. Over the next few days, the story of Marcus and the motorcycle rally spread beyond the town. Local newspapers wrote glowing articles about the event, calling it a testament to the power of community. Social media posts went viral, with hashtags like "Stand with Marcus" trending across platforms. People praised Marcus for his courage, hailing him as a modern-day hero. But not everyone was supportive. Some critics accused him of undermining law enforcement, arguing that interfering with police business could have dangerous consequences. Others dismissed the rally as nothing more than a publicity stunt, claiming it wouldn't lead to real change. Despite the backlash, Marcus remained unfazed. He didn't do what he did for recognition or validation. He did it because it was the right thing to do. And if standing up for someone like James meant facing criticism, so be it. What surprised him most, however, was how many people reached out to express their gratitude. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, sharing their own stories of discrimination, and thanking Marcus for giving them hope. Even local leaders, including the mayor, commended his actions, vowing to address issues of racial profiling and inequality within the community. For James, the aftermath of the rally was transformative. Encouraged by the overwhelming support he received, he decided to take control of his narrative. No longer would he let his past define him. Instead, he focused on building a brighter future, not just for himself, but for others like him. Inspired by Marcus's example, James began volunteering at a youth mentorship program aimed at helping young people avoid the mistakes he had made. He spoke openly about his experiences, using his story to teach kids about accountability, resilience, and second chances. James also became more involved in the community. He attended town hall meetings where residents discussed ways to improve relations between the police and marginalized groups. At first, James was hesitant to speak up, fearing judgment or ridicule. But when he finally found the courage to share his perspective, he was met with applause and understanding. His words resonated deeply, especially with those who had never considered what it felt like to walk in his shoes. Slowly but surely, James transformed from a man trying to rebuild his life into a voice for change. Meanwhile, Marcus continued running his bar, which had become a hub for activism and connection. People stopped by regularly to discuss social issues, organize fundraisers, and plan protests. Flyers promoting upcoming events covered the walls, alongside posters advocating for justice and equality. The jukebox played songs that carried messages of unity and empowerment, creating an atmosphere of positivity and purpose. For Marcus, it was rewarding to see his space evolve into something so meaningful. But it also came with challenges. Some locals disapproved of the bar's newfound reputation. They complained about the constant flow of visitors and worried that Marcus's actions might attract unwanted attention. A few even suggested he tone things down, warning him that stirring the pot could lead to trouble. Marcus listened patiently, but refused to back down. "If people want to gather here to talk about making our community better," he told them firmly, "then that's exactly what we're going to do." As weeks turned into months, the impact of the motorcycle rally continued to grow. The event inspired similar gatherings in neighboring towns, bringing together communities united by a shared desire for fairness and justice. Riders who had participated in the original rally stayed in touch, forming a network of support that spanned across state lines. Whenever someone needed help, whether it was defending a neighbor against discrimination or raising awareness about a pressing issue, they knew they could count on each other. Back in Marcus's town, progress was slow but steady. Conversations about systemic injustice became more frequent, and efforts to reform policing practices gained momentum. Local officials implemented training programs designed to reduce bias and promote accountability among officers. While some skeptics doubted these changes would make a significant difference, others remained hopeful. After all, every journey began with a single step. One evening, as Marcus closed up the bar, he noticed a familiar figure sitting on the curb outside. It was James, staring thoughtfully at the stars above. Marcus joined him, offering a friendly smile. "What's on your mind?" he asked gently. James hesitated before responding. "I've been thinking about how much has changed since that night," he admitted. "And I keep wondering, why did you do it? Why did you risk everything for me?" Marcus chuckled softly, leaning back on his hands. "Because you deserved a chance," he replied simply. "And because I believe in doing the right thing, no matter how hard it is." James nodded slowly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." In that moment, Marcus realized the true power of his actions. It wasn't just about defending James or inspiring hundreds of bikers to show up at his bar. It was about planting seeds of hope and courage that would continue to grow long after the rally ended. Every time someone drove past the bar, they were reminded of the day strangers came together to stand up for justice. It was proof that even in the darkest times, acts of kindness and bravery could ignite change. And for Marcus, it was a lesson he would carry with him forever. When you stand up for what's right, you inspire others to do the same. Sometimes, all it takes is one brave decision to spark a movement. The weeks following the motorcycle rally brought a mix of challenges and triumphs for Marcus and his community. The event had sparked conversations that many people had been too afraid to have before. At first, these discussions were awkward and tense, especially during town hall meetings where emotions ran high. Some residents argued passionately about the need for police reform, while others defended the status quo, insisting that officers were simply doing their jobs. But despite the disagreements, one thing was clear: the silence around issues of racial profiling and systemic injustice had been broken. Marcus found himself at the center of these debates, often speaking up when tensions threatened to boil over. He wasn't a politician or an activist by trade, but his calm demeanor and thoughtful words earned him respect from both sides. When tempers flared, he reminded everyone why they were there: to find solutions, not to assign blame. "We're all part of this community," he would say, his voice steady and reassuring. "If we want things to change, we've got to work together." James also became a regular presence at these meetings, though it took time for him to feel comfortable sharing his thoughts. At first, he sat quietly in the back, listening intently as others spoke. But one evening, after hearing a particularly heated argument about whether ex-convicts deserved a second chance, James stood up. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the microphone, but his voice rang out strong and clear. "I'm not asking for sympathy," he began, looking around the room. "I made mistakes, big ones, and I paid for them. What I'm asking for is fairness. Give people like me a chance to prove we can be better." His words struck a chord with many attendees, even those who had initially doubted him. A woman named Lisa, whose son had recently been arrested for shoplifting, approached James after the meeting. "Thank you for saying what you did," she said, her eyes red from crying. "It's hard to watch someone you love make bad choices, but hearing your story gives me hope." James nodded, offering her a small smile. For the first time in years, he felt like he had something valuable to contribute, not just to his own life, but to others. As the months passed, Marcus's bar continued to serve as a gathering place for those committed to creating change. Local activists held workshops on topics like implicit bias and conflict resolution, drawing crowds of curious residents eager to learn. Artists painted murals on the walls outside the bar, depicting scenes of unity and resilience. One mural showed a diverse group of people holding hands, while another featured a lone biker riding toward a sunrise, symbolizing hope and determination. These images became iconic, attracting visitors from neighboring towns who wanted to see the famous Bar of Justice for themselves. But not everything was smooth sailing. There were moments when progress seemed painfully slow or non-existent. Some police officers resisted efforts to implement new training programs, claiming they were unnecessary. Others accused activists of exaggerating the problem, dismissing their concerns as baseless complaints. Meanwhile, critics of the rally continued to spread negativity online, questioning Marcus's motives and accusing him of stirring division within the community. These attacks weighed heavily on Marcus, though. He tried not to let them show. Late at night, after closing up the bar, he would sit alone in the dimly lit room, staring at the empty chairs and tables. Doubts crept into his mind. Was he making any real difference? Or was he just wasting his time fighting battles that couldn't be won? On particularly tough nights, he called his older sister, Evelyn, who lived 2 states away. She always listened patiently before offering sage advice. "You can't fix everything overnight," she told him once. "But every step counts, no matter how small. Keep going, Marcus, you're doing good work." Her words gave him strength, but what truly kept him going was seeing the impact of his efforts. Small victories began to pile up. A local school district partnered with James's mentorship program to provide counseling services for at-risk youth. A grassroots campaign successfully lobbied city officials to install surveillance cameras in areas prone to discriminatory policing. Even some officers started attending community events, sitting down with residents to listen to their concerns. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that was enough for Marcus. One day, a letter arrived at the bar addressed to Marcus. It was from a young man named Derek, who had attended one of the rallies inspired by Marcus's actions. Derek wrote about how he had grown up feeling invisible, constantly judged because of his race and socioeconomic background. "Seeing all those bikers show up for you and James made me realize I'm not alone," he wrote. "It gave me the courage to apply for college, something I never thought I could do. Thank you for showing me that change is possible." Marcus read the letter aloud to James during a quiet afternoon at the bar. By the time he finished, both men had tears in their eyes. "This is why we keep going," Marcus said, folding the letter carefully and tucking it into his pocket. James nodded, his chest swelling with pride. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged, not just to the community, but to something bigger than himself. That sense of belonging extended beyond the town's borders. Riders who had participated in the original rally stayed in touch, forming a network of support that spanned across state lines. They organized similar events in other towns, bringing together communities united by a shared desire for fairness and justice. Whenever someone needed help, whether it was defending a neighbor against discrimination or raising awareness about a pressing issue, they knew they could count on each other. The movement Marcus had unknowingly ignited continued to grow, touching lives far beyond what he could have imagined. Back home, Marcus faced new challenges as well as opportunities. A local journalist approached him about writing a book based on his experiences, hoping to share his story with a wider audience. At first, Marcus hesitated, unsure if he was qualified to be anyone's role model. But James encouraged him to take the leap. "Your story isn't just yours anymore," James said firmly. "It belongs to everyone who's ever felt powerless. Let them hear it." With James's encouragement, Marcus agreed to collaborate on the project. Over the next several months, he worked closely with the journalist, recounting the events leading up to the rally and reflecting on its aftermath. Writing the book forced him to confront his fears and insecurities, but it also reinforced his belief in the power of standing up for what's right. By the time the manuscript was complete, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The book's release coincided with the anniversary of the motorcycle rally. To celebrate, Marcus hosted a special event at the bar, inviting riders, activists, and community members to join him. Hundreds of people showed up, filling the streets with laughter, music, and camaraderie. This time, however, the gathering wasn't just about celebrating the past, it was about looking toward the future. Speakers discussed ongoing efforts to address inequality, emphasizing the importance of staying vigilant and engaged. As the night drew to a close, Marcus stepped outside to thank everyone for coming. Standing under the same stars that had witnessed so much change, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. "A year ago, I didn't know what would happen when I stood up for James," he admitted, his voice filled with emotion. "All I knew was that it was the right thing to do. And today I see how that one decision has touched so many lives, including my own." The crowd erupted in applause, cheering for Marcus and the community they had built together. As he looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, others new, Marcus realized that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice was far from over, but with each passing day, more people joined the cause. Together, they proved that even in the darkest times, acts of kindness and courage could ignite change. And for Marcus, it was a lesson he would carry with him forever. When you stand up for what's right, you inspire others to do the same. Sometimes all it takes is one brave decision to spark a movement. The months following the anniversary of the motorcycle rally brought a renewed sense of purpose to Marcus and his community. The event had not only solidified their resolve, but also inspired them to take concrete steps toward lasting change. Marcus, James, and others who had been part of the movement began working tirelessly to address systemic issues that plagued their town. It wasn't easy, progress was slow, and resistance came from unexpected places, but they refused to give up. One of the biggest challenges was mending the strained relationship between the police department and the community. Trust had eroded over years of misunderstandings, biases, and incidents like the one involving James. To bridge this gap, Marcus proposed hosting monthly Community Connect sessions at his bar. These informal gatherings would allow residents and officers to sit down together, share meals, and engage in open conversations without judgment or hostility. At first, attendance was sparse, with only a handful of curious citizens and reluctant officers showing up. But as word spread about the positive interactions, more people started participating. During one session, an officer named Officer Daniels shared a story that struck a chord with everyone present. He talked about how he joined the force because he wanted to help people, only to find himself caught in a system that often prioritized quotas over compassion. "I'm not saying we're perfect," he admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But I want you to know there are good cops out there who care about this community." His honesty earned him applause, and for the first time, many residents saw the officers as individuals rather than faceless authority figures. James played a crucial role in these sessions, using his experiences to foster understanding. He spoke candidly about what it felt like to be judged based on his past and how difficult it was to rebuild trust after serving time in prison. His vulnerability resonated deeply, especially with younger attendees who feared being stereotyped themselves. One teenager named Malik, whose older brother had recently been arrested, approached James after a session. "I don't know if I can fix things with my family," Malik confessed, tears streaming down his face. James placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "You can't change the past, but you can choose your future," he said. "Start small, show up, try." These moments of connection weren't limited to the Community Connect sessions. Inspired by the success of the gatherings, local schools invited Marcus and James to speak to students about leadership, accountability, and resilience. Teachers noticed a shift in the kids' attitudes. They became more empathetic, asking thoughtful questions and expressing interest in making a difference. Some even formed clubs focused on social justice, organizing fundraisers and awareness campaigns. For Marcus and James, seeing young people take initiative was incredibly rewarding. It reminded them that change didn't always come from the top. Sometimes it started with the smallest voices. Meanwhile, Marcus's bar continued to evolve into a hub of activism and creativity. Artists from neighboring towns visited regularly, painting new murals and hosting workshops for aspiring creators. Musicians performed original songs about unity and hope, drawing crowds that spilled out onto the streets. Even poets held readings, their words weaving stories of struggle and triumph that left audiences moved to tears. The bar had become more than just a place. It was a living testament to the power of art and expression in driving social change. However, not all developments were positive. As the movement gained momentum, so did opposition. A small but vocal group of critics accused Marcus and his supporters of pushing a divisive agenda. They argued that focusing on racial profiling and inequality undermined the hard work of law enforcement and created unnecessary tension. Flyers appeared around town, urging residents to stop playing the victim and support our police. Anonymous comments flooded social media, attacking Marcus personally and questioning his intentions. At first, the negativity shook Marcus. He couldn't understand why some people refused to see the value in what they were trying to achieve. But James reminded him of something important. "Not everyone is ready to hear the truth," James said one evening as they sat outside the bar. "That doesn't mean we stop telling it." Those words stuck with Marcus, giving him the strength to push forward despite the criticism. To counteract the backlash, Marcus and his allies launched a campaign called Voices of Unity. The initiative aimed to amplify diverse perspectives within the community, showcasing stories of cooperation and mutual respect. Residents were encouraged to submit essays, videos, or artwork, highlighting moments when someone stood up for them or helped them overcome adversity. The submissions poured in, ranging from heartfelt letters to powerful photographs. One entry, written by a single mother named Carla, described how a neighbor had watched her children during a financial crisis, allowing her to keep her job. Another submission featured a photo of two teenagers, one black, one white, playing basketball side by side, symbolizing friendship across racial lines. The campaign culminated in a public exhibition held at the town hall. Hundreds of people attended, marveling at the creativity and sincerity of the displays. What struck everyone most was how universal the themes of kindness and solidarity were. Regardless of background or circumstance, everyone craved connection and fairness. The exhibition served as a reminder that while differences existed, they didn't have to divide. As the year drew to a close, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that fateful night when he defended James. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. His bar, once just a quiet watering hole, had transformed into a beacon of hope and resilience. People from all walks of life gathered there, not just to drink and socialize, but to dream and strategize about a better future. Even the police department began implementing reforms, thanks in part to the relationships forged through the Community Connect sessions. For James, the transformation was equally profound. He no longer saw himself as a man defined by his mistakes. Instead, he embraced his role as a mentor and advocate, determined to leave a lasting legacy. The youth program he helped build flourished, attracting volunteers and funding from across the region. Kids who once felt lost now had direction, guided by James's unwavering belief in second chances. And then, one snowy December evening, a surprise arrived at the bar. A delivery truck pulled up outside, carrying boxes filled with custom-made leather jackets. Each jacket bore the name of Marcus's bar, along with a patch reading, "Riders for Justice." It was a gift from the bikers who had participated in the original rally. Inside one of the boxes, Marcus found a note signed by dozens of riders. "This is just the beginning. Keep fighting, brother. We've got your back." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he read the message. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be without obstacles, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Together with James, the riders, and the entire community, they had proven that courage and compassion could spark real change. And as long as they stood united, nothing could stand in their way. For Marcus, it was a lesson he would carry with him forever. When you stand up for what's right, you inspire others to do the same. Sometimes all it takes is one brave decision to spark a movement. As winter gave way to spring, Marcus's town began to feel like a different place altogether. The seeds of change planted during the motorcycle rally had taken root, sprouting into something vibrant and alive. People who once avoided eye contact now greeted each other warmly on the streets. Conversations that might have ended in arguments months ago were now resolved with understanding and patience. It wasn't perfect, there were still disagreements, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but the spirit of unity had woven itself into the fabric of the community. Marcus noticed the shift every time he opened his bar. What had once been a quiet spot for drinks and casual chats was now buzzing with energy. Artists painted new murals on the walls outside, musicians played soulful tunes inside, and activists hosted workshops about everything from voting rights to mental health awareness. The bar had become more than just a business. It was a sanctuary for those seeking connection, inspiration, and purpose. Even tourists passing through town stopped by, curious to see the place where hundreds of bikers had gathered to defend justice. But what truly amazed Marcus was how the movement had spread beyond the town's borders. News of the Riders for Justice and their mission traveled far and wide, inspiring similar gatherings in cities across the country. Bikers who had participated in the original rally formed chapters in their own communities, united by the belief that standing up for others could create ripples of positive change. They stayed connected through social media, sharing updates, strategies, and stories of triumph. Whenever someone needed help, whether it was defending a neighbor against discrimination or organizing a protest, they knew they could count on the Riders for Justice network. One day, a letter arrived at the bar addressed to Marcus. It came from a woman named Sarah, who lived in a small town several states away. She wrote about how her son, a black teenager named Elijah, had faced harassment from local police officers simply for walking home late at night. Desperate for advice, she reached out to Marcus after reading an article about his story. "I don't know what to do," she confessed. "How do I protect my child when the people supposed to keep him safe are the ones hurting him?" Marcus sat down to reply, his heart heavy with empathy. He understood the fear and frustration Sarah must be feeling. In his response, he shared not only his own experience but also practical steps she could take, documenting incidents, reaching out to civil rights organizations, and building alliances with supportive neighbors. He ended the letter with words meant to comfort and empower her. "You're stronger than you think," he wrote, "and you're not alone. There are people out there willing to stand with you." Sarah's letter was just one of many Marcus received from strangers touched by his actions. Some thanked him for giving them hope. Others sought guidance on how to address injustices in their own lives. Each message reinforced his belief that even the smallest acts of courage could inspire others to act. It was a responsibility Marcus didn't take lightly, but it was also a privilege, a reminder that his decision to stand up for James had sparked a chain reaction far greater than he ever imagined. Meanwhile, James continued to thrive in his role as a mentor and advocate. The youth program he helped build became a cornerstone of the community, offering tutoring, job training, and counseling services to young people struggling to find their footing. Kids who once felt invisible now had a safe space to express themselves and dream big. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus visited the program to check on its progress. As he walked through the bustling center, he saw kids laughing, learning, and working together. A group of teenagers huddled around a table, brainstorming ideas for a community garden project. Another cluster practiced dance routines for an upcoming performance. The energy was infectious, filling Marcus with pride. James spotted Marcus and waved him over. "Look at this," James said, pointing to a bulletin board covered in colorful notes and drawings. Each piece of paper represented a goal set by the participants. "I want to graduate high school. I want to start my own business. I want to make my mom proud." Marcus smiled, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "You've done incredible work here," he told James sincerely. James shook his head modestly. "We've done it," he corrected. "None of this would have been possible without your support and everyone else's." The partnership between Marcus and James had grown into something extraordinary. They weren't just friends, they were brothers in arms, bound by a shared vision of a better future. Their bond inspired others to collaborate, breaking down barriers that had long divided the community. Neighbors worked side by side to clean up parks, teachers partnered with parents to improve schools, and businesses hired formerly incarcerated individuals, giving them a second chance. Slowly but surely, the town transformed into a model of resilience and cooperation. Still, challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the changes happening around them. Some residents clung to old prejudices, refusing to acknowledge the harm caused by systemic inequality. Others grew weary of the constant push for reform, arguing that enough had already been done. But Marcus and his allies refused to let cynicism derail their efforts. Instead, they doubled down, focusing on education, dialogue, and action. They knew that lasting change required persistence and patience. One evening, as Marcus closed up the bar, he stepped outside to admire the stars twinkling above. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. He thought about how far they'd come since that tense night when he stood up for James. Back then, he couldn't have predicted the ripple effects of his actions. The hundreds of motorcycles, the national attention, the friendships forged, the lives transformed. Yet here they were, standing stronger than ever. A familiar rumble interrupted his thoughts. Turning toward the sound, Marcus saw headlights approaching. Dozens of motorcycles rolled into view, their riders clad in leather jackets bearing the Riders for Justice emblem. Leading the pack was the burly man with tattoos who had first shaken Marcus's hand during the original rally. As the bikes parked along the street, the man dismounted and strode toward Marcus, grinning widely. "We heard you could use some reinforcements," the man said, extending his hand. Marcus laughed, shaking it firmly. "What brings you all here?" he asked, though he suspected the answer. The man gestured to the growing crowd of townspeople gathering outside the bar. "Word got out that today's the anniversary of the rally. Figured we'd drop by to celebrate and remind folks that the fight's not over yet." By morning, the entire town buzzed with excitement. The Riders for Justice had organized a festival to mark the occasion, complete with live music, food trucks, and activities for kids. Hundreds of people attended, dancing, singing, and sharing stories of progress and perseverance. Speakers took turns addressing the crowd, emphasizing the importance of staying vigilant and committed to justice. When Marcus stepped up to speak, the audience erupted in applause. "I never set out to start a movement," Marcus admitted, his voice filled with emotion. "All I wanted to do was protect someone who deserved a fair shot. But look at what happened because of that one decision. Look at how far we've come. Together." He paused, scanning the sea of faces before him. "This isn't just my story. It's our story. And as long as we keep standing up for each other, there's nothing we can't achieve." The festival ended with a powerful moment, the unveiling of a permanent plaque outside the bar. Inscribed on it were the words, "In memory of the night." Courage sparked a movement. May we always stand united in the pursuit of justice. As the crowd cheered, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the recognition, but for the community that had risen alongside him. For Marcus, the journey had taught him invaluable lessons. He learned that bravery wasn't about being fearless, it was about acting despite fear. He discovered that even the smallest acts of kindness could ignite monumental change. And most importantly, he realized that no one had to face adversity alone. Together with determination and love, people could overcome anything. As the sun set on another chapter in their story, Marcus looked around at the smiling faces of his friends, family, and neighbors. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew they were ready. For Marcus, it was a truth he would carry with him forever. When you stand up for what's right, you inspire others to do the same. Sometimes all it takes is one brave decision to spark a movement.